Good morning and welcome to Class 27 of Developmental Psychology, Psych 250 for the NDSU Summer 2017 semester. Today we're talking about romantic relationships, marriage, and family life in adulthood. Just to keep us on track since we're in our last couple of days, tomorrow is our last lecture. We'll be talking about end of life, specifically death, dying, and bereavement. So that'll be a relatively short lecture. And the reason I'm keeping it short is because I want to give you enough time to finish working on your essays. Now your essays are due tomorrow the 26th at 11:59 p.m. You can turn them in early. I've had 3 students turn theirs in early, so thank you to those students for getting those in. If you turn them in to me, I'm already grading them as they come in, and then I'm sending them off for peer review. So as groups of 2 submit together, I'll send you another students to peer review. Now, just a reminder, the peer review is anonymous. I have just numbered everyone in the class, and so in a random order. So just you won't know who you're grading, and you won't know who graded you. And I will send you once once the peer review has been done, once you've done your peer review and the person you partnered with finished theirs, I will email them. I will email you your classmates' review and my review, and they won't say which is which. And they should have a grade on the bottom, so you'll kind of see where you are. And so far, I've gotten some of the peer reviews back, and so far the grades are but my grade and your classmates' grades seem to be pretty accurate, within a couple points of each other. So the same letter grade anyway. So that's good. I think that's really good, and I'm very very impressed by what I've read so far. I'm very very impressed. Um, these are some of the best essays I've ever gotten. So good job. Keep up the good work. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this, just let me know. I'm happy to help. Um, Thursday, like I said yesterday, we are not going to be meeting on campus for workshop number 2. That time period should be used by you to do your peer review and get it back to me. And the peer reviews are due back to me Thursday night at 11:59 p.m. So there has to be a pretty quick turnaround. It doesn't take very long to read them. I think it takes me about 15 minutes or so to read and provide feedback. So maybe a little bit more. It's kind of hard to tell because I also have to put the peer review packet together at the same time, but it shouldn't take you too long to do. And the sooner you can get your essay in and the sooner you can do your peer review, the more time you'll have to do revisions. So that's why I'm encouraging people to turn them in early if you're already finished with them, so that you can get, if some of you have already gotten or are about to get your peer reviews back, and that means that you'll be able to have many days to do revisions. So the quicker the better, because revisions are due on Saturday at 11:59 p.m. And we're just a reminder, you don't have to do revisions if you are satisfied with either or of the grades that you get. Then you don't have to worry about it, because what I'll probably do for your final grade is I'll look at the peer review that your classmate did, and I'll look at mine, and I'll kind of compare them, and I'll go with the grade that I think is the most fair. So if you're pleased with the grade, you don't have to resubmit. That's just an option. If you resubmit, I will regrade it, so you have the potential to get a better grade. I won't give you a worse grade than what you had, but I will potentially give you a better grade, and I'll give you an extra credit point for resubmitting. And then Thursday night from 5 to 6 on Google Hangouts, we'll have our exam review session. So the way that works is you bring questions to me, I answer them. You can also just participate on the discussion forum online. Either one works. I'll do some sample questions with you. I'll kind of quiz you to see how well you know the material. So it's pretty beneficial. The students who went to the exam review last time made the highest scores in the class on the midterm exam. So it definitely helped them. The final exam, same as the midterm, you'll be able to access it starting at midnight on Friday, and it'll be available until 11:59 p.m. on Friday as well. So you have 24 hours to do it, and you need to um, make sure that you allot enough time. I would say at least 50 minutes to do it. It'll auto-submit at 11:59 p.m. and it'll auto-submit after 80 minutes. So make sure that you budget your time wisely so that you can get the exam completed. And I'll send a little nudge reminder if people at like 9 o'clock, if people haven't done it. I'll just kind of send out a little email, hey, remember to do this. Um, because, like I said yesterday, I don't work here as of Monday the 31st. So, or the end of the day, Monday the 31st. So I don't have a lot of time to get the grades, all the grading done. So I'm trying to get that turned around as quickly as possible. Now, along with that, I didn't talk about this yesterday, but your quiz is due Friday. It'll open Wednesday at noon. So your quiz will be due, and that covers the material from this week and last week. Your discussion forum is also due Friday at 11:59 p.m. So there's a lot of stuff due on Friday. So the quicker you can get this stuff done, the better. Um, there are a lot of you who do the questions every day as you watch the lectures, and that's really the way it was designed. Obviously, I'm letting you do it. I give you a lot of leeway in when you can do it, but I encourage you and not go so far as to plead with you, but to just tell you to be mindful because you're going to have a lot of things due on Friday, and I want to minimize the number of things that you have to do. So if you can get your essay into me before Wednesday, then Wednesday you can finish your discussion questions and quiz, and then that will leave Thursday for you to do peer review and exam review. Um, so just want to keep you mindful of that. Now, I've posted a discussion question for the Milk film. I don't know if anyone else watched that. One person reached out to me and said they'd watched it. So I posted a question. If you watched a different film and you want to complete the questions, email me and I will post the questions. I'm just not going to post questions if people didn't watch the film. That is due on Saturday at 11:59 p.m. SONA also, if you do any SONA studies, you need to get those done by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. and email me how many SONA points you got because I can't see them until after the 6th, but I can't put grades in then, so I'm just going to have to go off. This is going to be honor system. Um, Alternatively, there is a short essay that you can write. The topic is on the Blackboard announcements. If you complete that, I'll give you 10 points. The other thing, I didn't mention this because I don't want to I want people to take advantage of every opportunity to do well, but I cap every assignment at its max number of points. So if there were discussion questions and there are only 4 possible points but you got 7 points, I cap it at 4. But all the extra points you get go towards your extra credit total. So that's another thing to be mindful of. If you go and add up all of the points that you have for each thing, if you got more discussion points than you needed, those will go towards your extra credit in the class. So you don't lose them. I don't let anyone get more than 100 on anything. So I cap everything. So just be mindful of that as well. So far nobody's gone over the 400 total, so you're good, or the 300 total, so you're good. But some of you have gone over the number of discussion points that you needed for the semester. Keep doing the discussions because all of those will go towards extra credit for the course. All right, that's everything. I don't know how I'm keeping up with all this. I'm so tired. I'm packing and trying to I've got to start taking my office apart. Tomorrow, and I'm dreading it. So just keep me in mind. If you pray, keep me in your prayers. If you think good thoughts, keep me in your good thoughts because I'm gonna need it. I'm really stressed out by this whole thing. Our picture of the day is from Aristocats. If you've not seen it, you should. It's a great film. This is how I felt this morning when I woke up. Not because I didn't get a morning message from Babe, but because I didn't want to get up. Today we're talking about relationships in adulthood. This is one of my favorite lectures because I really enjoy relationships. I think they're fascinating. I think that things that we get from relationships are really important and really underrated. So let's talk about friends and siblings. Friends, starting in adolescence and continuing on to adulthood, friends are very important to healthy development. Now, in terms of the trends that we see, men tend to have less same sex friends. So, men tend to be friends with more women than they are with men. On the other hand, women tend to have more other sex friends after marriage than men. So, that's another interesting trend. Men typically are not friends with women after they get married. They tend to, at that point, have more male friends. And then at after marriage, women tend to have more male friends. And there's, I think a lot of different reasonable explanations for that. One, men before marriage are trying to get married, so they're going to make friends with as many women as possible to try to find someone who they want to be with. So that's why we see that trend. That doesn't mean guys don't have same-sex friends. They still have a good group of them, but in terms of their larger friend circle, guys tend to have more girlfriends than they do guy friends. Um, on the other hand, why do women have more guy friends after marriage? Well, because they're friends with their husband's friends. Their husband really invests more in his male friendships, and the wife tends to be friends with them as well. So that is why we see that trend. Now, in terms of our siblings, as we age, our siblings become our closest friends. So we tend to have a stronger bond with our sisters than our brothers. Um, Usually because sisters tend to be more nurturing. A lot of times, if you have an older sister, she may also be sort of a pseudo mother figure to you. I'm definitely a mother figure to my younger siblings um, because, frankly, I'm old enough to be their parent. Um, my youngest sibling is 6 years old, so I was 18 when she was born, so I could have been her parent. Um, Funny story about her. I love Piper is her name, and I love her a lot. She's so cute. But uh, one time she got into a fight with one of my other siblings, and my sister Kristen, who's a couple months, well, she's like 18 months younger than me, so she intervened and said, Piper, instead of getting upset with Becca when she does something you don't like, you should tell her, and if she doesn't listen to you, then you should tell a parent. And Piper looked at her and said, I'm telling you, you are a parent. So, uh, just point in case that, a lot of times our older siblings can be more of a parent to us, and because girls tend to be, especially older girls, tend to be thinking or getting sort of in that biological period of motherhood, tend to be more nurturing of younger siblings. So that's why we tend to have a stronger bond with our sisters. Siblings provide us with good social support. They're sort of people our own age who we grew up with, who are going through similar things that we're going through at the same period of time, and they can provide really important social support. Now, as we get even older, we start to have some pretty big life events happening. Things like marriage, things like parents getting older, parents dying, or other family members dying. And all of these tend to bring siblings closer. Also, the death of another sibling as you get into late adulthood also brings the sibling group even more close because you start to really sense your own mortality and the fact that, oh my gosh, we're getting really old. Now, in terms of different types of relationships or lifestyles, there are many different kinds of the kind of life that an adult could have. It's much more diverse than I think we really realize. The majority of people, um, 75% of young adults, are unpartnered. So most people don't have a partner. So if you don't have one, well, guess what? You're normal. Men are more likely to be single than women. Women tend to, because a lot of it's because of a lot of archaic views we have about women and women's sexuality and women's independence. Most women feel pressure to get married quickly because a married young woman has a lot more social standing than an unmarried one. Still in 2017. Um, Single people tend to report more freedom and individuality. So most single people like the identity aspect of being single. But loneliness and dating frustration are very high for singles. So while we enjoy our individuality and our freedom, we still want that intimacy connection because that's what young adults want. That's the main motivation for everything in young adulthood. So that can cause a lot of frustration and a lot of isolation and a lot of loneliness. Now, in terms of all partnered couples, 60% go through what's called cohabitation. And cohabitation is living with a sexual partner outside of marriage. So if you're partnered with someone, but you're not married to them, they're just your partner, and you're living with them, you're normal because most people do that. Um, a lot of people see this as a preparation for marriage. Other people see it as an alternative to marriage. They say, well, marriage is just an archaic practice of, based on the ownership of property, where women used to be considered property until like the 50s. Women actually were property. They didn't have the same rights as men. Even after they got the right to vote, they still didn't have a lot of the same rights as men. Um, so a lot of people say, I don't really want to get married. I just want to live with the person that I care about. And so that's some people see it as an alternative. Now, while a lot of people see it as a preparation for marriage in the US, it's a strong factor predicting divorce. So in other words, people who cohabitate tend to have a higher likelihood of getting divorced. Um, However, that's not to say that there's anything wrong with it, because in Europe we see the opposite. People who get married quickly tend to get divorced quickly, and people who live together tend to not get divorced. The reason we estimate, or not estimate, but hypothesize we see these differences across cultures is that in Europe cohabitation is considered normal and considered acceptable, whereas in the US it's, especially in really conservative religious parts of the country, it's considered living in sin. So like there's a lot of social stigma around it, and it can lead to a lot of really unnecessary arguments between family members. Um, there's just a lot of judgment that goes on, and so it strains the relationship to the point that my my guess is that what happens is these people who cohabitate who then get divorced feel pressured into getting married, so they get married, but it doesn't actually fix their relationship issues based on the fact that people are judging them for living together. So marriage is not a reset on a relationship. A lot of people think it is. Like, oh, if I just get married, it'll all get better. Oh, if I just get pregnant, it'll all get better. No, it's not a reset. Marriage is an additional stressor. Pregnancy is an additional stressor to a lot of people. So that's my hypothesis, is that these people were not going to stay together anyway. They just get married to try to fix it, and it just doesn't work. So that's my guess of why that we see that trend. So for your discussion, and you can do this either now or after you watch the lecture, I just want to know, what are you looking for in a life partner? If you're already married, that's fine. You can just tell us about your partner and what attracted you to that person originally, and why you're with them, and what role they play in their life. You can tell us as much as you want. You don't have to be like this private. I like his blue eyes, or I like her smile. I mean, that's fine too. Um, So I'll tell you what I'm looking for in a life partner. And I thought about this a lot. And I think I've said before, I identify as pansexual, so I'm open to any person um, who's obviously of age. And um, for me, it's more about the person. So it's kind of hard for me to say, oh, this is what I'm looking for in a person, because I kind of just let my emotional meter tell me who I'm best suited for when I meet them. But in a very general way, what I want in a life partner is someone who I can be vulnerable with and feel safe. Because for me, there are not a lot of people who I can be open and honest about the way that I feel and the things that I want, or the experiences that I've had, or the thoughts that I have about myself, and then not feel like they're judging me, or they're trying to change me, or they're trying to convince me of something. I just want someone who can be there with me in the moment and say, yeah, that sucks. I really am sorry. Or, yeah, I want that too. Or, just affirm me, just be positive, and someone who challenges me to be a better person and who helps me grow. Someone who I enjoy spending time with, who I can have jokes with. In my experience, I've only ever been in love twice. And in my experience, you just kind of know. You just kind of know when it happens. Um, one day you're just sitting there and you're like, this is how I want the rest of my life to be. And that's how you know when you found the right person. If you can't imagine like your life any other way, that's you found the right person. And so, um, yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So what predicts romantic relationships? Adults tend to look for romantic partners who are similar in personality to themselves. So, this idea that opposites attract is not really statistically true. Now, that being said, just because someone has a similar personality or a similar set of interests does not mean that they're going to be compatible with you. And sometimes personalities do not mesh well. Sometimes you meet people who are similar to you, and it's not the person. The reality is, we may look for people who are similar to ourselves, and we may end up with people who are similar to ourselves, but the similarity is really just surface level. Um, our emotional connection with that person is really just it's really almost a matter of chance, to be honest. You just meet the right person who just clicks with you. Um, doesn't necessarily have to have the same personality. All of the two people that I've fallen in love with, neither one of them had a similar personality to me. Um, Whereas I've been in relationships with people with similar personalities, and they were awful, and I wasn't in love with them. Um, but of course, that's my experience. That's not the standard. But I'm interested. Maybe you're with people who are different than you, or maybe you're with people who are like you. But I think ultimately, what people look for is they look for someone that they can connect with. So like my parents have different personalities. My dad is very extroverted, very outgoing, very agreeable. My mom tends to be very introverted. She's kind, and she's open to other people, but she doesn't like a lot of fuss. She doesn't like a lot of attention, and I'm very much like my mom. My mom was the VBS director at my church for 4 years, and at the end of her time, they called her to the front of the church to thank her, and she was so embarrassed because she didn't do any of it for recognition, and she just really made her very uncomfortable. My dad, on the other hand, was so proud of her, and he thought it was a great thing. So, I mean, they're very different, but the way that they're similar is in what they ultimately wanted. They wanted someone that loved them unconditionally, who would raise a family, who they could raise a family with, who they trusted, who they wanted to be with. They didn't have the same religious background. My dad is from a very conservative fundamentalist religion. My mom um, was Baptist, but from a much more progressive family. So their religion was very well, not they were same religion, denominations and practice were very different. Family backgrounds were different. My mom is from upper middle class, very well educated, academic town family. My dad was from a working class family from the country where his parents were first generation college students. Very, very different. Different it was socioeconomics, different with like life goals, but the one thing that they had in common is they wanted to be with someone who made them feel safe, made them feel loved, and they found each other, and somehow, even though they're incredibly different people, they it works. They have 7 kids, so obviously they had 7 kids. The seventh one they had like 6 years ago, so obviously they're still in love with each other. I like to say, when you turn 18 and your parents announce that they're pregnant, it's a very poignant and disgusting reminder that they're still having sex. Um, anyway, so a lot of this is tied to our evolution, and we talked about in adolescence, we talked about the development of sexuality and sexual attraction. And ultimately, the sort of the physical stimulation that we get from a relationship is based entirely on the need to reproduce. And so We're going to look for someone who we believe can get us the can get us to reproduce. So women tend to look for men who are intelligent, ambitious, have high financial status, and are very moral. And if you think about this, what do all of these have in common? Well, people who are intelligent and ambitious and have high financial status are more likely to be successful. In other words, they are going to be more likely to provide you with a healthy context in which to reproduce. Now, we don't actively look around at people and think to ourselves, they're going to help me be healthy and have a healthy pregnancy, and our children are going to make it because we're going to be able to eat. We don't think that. It's all instinctual. It's all part of who we are. It is literally the genes inside our DNA which got us to the point where we are, because that gene has been passed down. That drive to be with someone who will help us reproduce, that is actually what has gotten us to the point where we are actually existing. And so that's what really motivates us towards partners. And then in terms of morals, women tend to be much more moral than men because of the way that they're conditioned. And so women tend to look for men who are going to complement that morality, who are going to provide, who are going to treat them with respect. And a lot of times we equate morality with being treated well. And ultimately, yes, it should be. On the other hand, men tend to go for physical appearance and domestic skills. And then everyone's like eye rolling, like, yeah, of course men are sexist. And yes, when taken to an extreme, this is sexist. But from an evolutionary standpoint, this also has a key role to play in our our need to reproduce, our imperative to reproduce. So in terms of physical appearance, guys look for women who have wide hips, who are actually larger. So we have this stereotype that men like these skinny, like tiny women. Men actually are physically attracted, not like instinctually, to women with wider hips, larger body frames, and a little bit more body fat. And the reason for that is those women are the most likely to have healthy pregnancies. Now, obviously, with our advances in medical technology, that's no longer a big issue. But from an evolutionary standpoint, that would indicate this is a healthy person to reproduce with. And then in terms of domestic skills, they look for women who will be able to raise the kids, nurture the kids, maintain the household. And this is all it sounds very sexist, but you have to remember this is all based in evolution and what we needed when we were very primitive to get us to the point where we are now. And so we look for different things. Women look for men that can help get them pregnant and keep them healthy and keep their offspring healthy. Men look for women who can actually, in fact, reproduce with them. And this is all at an instinctual, subconscious level. This is what's happening. But what is really important when you take away all of the evolution, when you wipe it away and you put everyone as equal, where everyone is just looking for some kind of psychological satisfaction, not a physical one, the most important partner qualifications that people are looking for are mutual attraction. Is the person caring? Are they dependable? Are they emotionally mature? And are they pleasing to be around? Are they fun to be with? That's what people really are ultimately looking for. The physical stuff, this biological stuff, the va va voom, you see someone, you're like, wow, I want to get with them. That isn't love. That isn't romance. That is all that is our biological instinct saying you need to reproduce. Because if you don't, then your genes will die. You've got to reproduce. And so we're looking for someone with whom to reproduce. But what we really want to satisfy our emotional need, that romantic drive within us, are these psychological and social characteristics, things that were just attraction. And yes, physical attraction too, but also just like psychological attraction. Do I like this person? Are they someone that I enjoy being around? Are they nice to me and nice to other people? Can I depend upon them? Are they going to be able to be there for me when I'm vulnerable? Are they going to react in culturally appropriate ways? And are they just like pleasant to be around? I mean, that's what people really want. And then that's consistent across everyone. Personality differences aside, interests aside, this is what people want. Sternberg came up with what he calls the triangular theory of love. And this proposes that love has three different components that shift in priority as a relationship develops. In other words, they all exist together at the same time, but we put more inference or more importance on different ones depending on where we are in the relationship. The first is intimacy, and this is emotional. This is an emotional component. And this is a warm, tender feeling about the partner and their well being, and a desire for reciprocation. In other words, I meet this person, I care very deeply for them. When I look at them, I just feel very warm and like they're everything that I want and everything that I need. And I want them to be happy. I want them to be safe. It hurts me to see them unhappy, to see them miserable. And I really want them to feel the same way about me. That's intimacy. The second is passion, and this is biological and psychological. So it's a combination of sexual arousal, so the biological desire to reproduce with them, and the romantic feelings that come along with sort of this emotional intimacy. So I care a lot about this person. I want to have sex with them, and I just want to I want to be a singular entity with them. That is what romantic feelings are. Just sort of this. I mean, it's hard to explain. If you've ever been in love, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like passion isn't like merely I want to have sex with that person. We've all had that where you see someone, you're like, I would have sex with them, but I wouldn't take them home to meet my parents, or I wouldn't go out to dinner with them. I would just have sex with them and be done with it. Passion, though, is the combination of really wanting to have sex with them, but not because you want to have sex, but because you love them that much that it's the only way that you could, like, it's the next logical step in expressing how much you love them. It's like I want to be that physically vulnerable with you because I am so emotionally vulnerable with you and I care so deeply about you that I just want to be with you physically because I want to be that vulnerable with you, and doesn't have so much. It's not the same. It's not the same as just wanting to have sex with someone. It's like you actually really like you you have this need to be part of them for a while because you care about them that much. Um, and so it's sort of that combination of that biological and then that intimacy, as I said. And then the last component is commitment, and this is completely cognitive. And that is when you realize I'm in love with this person. When you've gone several months, maybe, or several years, who knows, um, and you just realize one day, this person is everything, and I don't want my life to be any different. Like, this is how I want every day of my life to be from this point forward. And it's again hard to explain to someone who's never been there before. You just realize it's just something that you realize, you just know. And there's not a debate, there's not a question, you just know. And you're like at peace with it, and you're happy and you're calm, and it's your brain making that connection that this is the person that satisfies your need for intimacy and passion. And um, it's a conscious decision, but it's also a subconscious decision to remain in love. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to love that person anymore. I'm still in love with the person who I first fell in love with 7 years ago. I still love him. I haven't really talked to him and had a good conversation with him in 7 years. I haven't seen him in 7 years. We're still friends, but I do still love him. I always will. I'll never stop loving him because I was actually truly in love with him. Um, Now, do I love him in the same way? Not anymore. Um, I'm I'm in love with someone else, and it doesn't mean that the feelings that I had for the first guy were less real or less pure. They weren't reciprocated ultimately, and my I moved on in the sense that I've I've not you never, I think, truly give up hope that someone that you love will love you back, but um, I've stopped actively hoping, and it's more of just a concept now. But uh, yeah, I just, now I love someone else, and I thought, I mean, everyone said, oh, it's just because it was the first time, the first person. It feels the same every time. It does feel a little different, but it's pretty much the same. Both of these relationships were ones where I didn't start out wanting anything but friendship, and then one day I just literally realized I really care about this person. Like, I have I want them to be happy. I want them to be safe. I want them to have everything that they want, and I want to be there with them while they do everything that they want to do. I want to share their life. It just happened. And you can't stop it. You can't just say, "Well, I'm not going to love this person because they don't love me." You you kind of hope that maybe they'll figure it out, or that, I don't know. So, I mean, there is this sort of conscious decision to remain in love. You acknowledge, I love this person. And that commitment is often expressed through marriage or through telling them that you love them and that you're committed to them. But it's also subconscious, too. I mean, you make almost a lifetime commitment. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 14 years, like 14 years after meeting the first guy I fell in love with, I won't care about him at all. I doubt it because I still feel as strongly for him today as I did 7 years ago. Um, and I've been with other people since him that I'm like, yeah, I don't really care about them at all. Like, I have feelings of goodwill for them. I care about them in the sense that they were someone who was once important to me, but like in terms of feeling of like intimacy or romantic feeling or any passion, it's like there's none of it. I don't care. Like, I'm not committed to them or the idea of them or committed to what we had. I'm just like, yeah, that was something that I did in the past. Someone that I was with in the past, and I don't really care anymore. Um, so how do romantic relationships develop? There are two distinct stages of this. The first is passionate love. And this is when you have an intense sexual attraction. So this is the biological component where you're like really, really into them. Like, you really want to be with them. You want to reproduce with them because you have this need to reproduce. And this passionate love exists for one purpose and one purpose only, to get that relationship jump started. It's sort of like an introduction. Now, this doesn't work for everybody. Some people, especially people who are asexual, don't feel this. They don't have intense sexual attraction. They might feel somewhat of an arousal or somewhat of an attraction. It may not be as intense as it is for other people. The second stage is companionate love, and this is when you enter into a warm, trusting affection and caregiving. And this begins when passion declines. And so, what we actually see is that these feelings of being in love decline over time. We have very high passion, and then it starts to decline about 5 years into a relationship, and then it comes down here. Now, it's still pretty high, so like this is the baseline right here, right? So it's still pretty high, but it's not as high as it was. I mean, this is like bump chicka wah wah level like passion, and then this right here is like, yeah, we could have sex tonight. Well, we could do that. And anyone watching this who's married is like, yeah, that totally happens. Like, you're just like, one day you're just like, whatever. Um, the other, now they're distinct stages, right? But they still exist. Companionate love and passionate love exist at the same time. So companionate love tends to start out lower, at a lower level, when you are first starting out. Now, this is still pretty high. Like, you'd say, like, most friendships are about right here. So, I mean, they're your best friend, right? But then as this starts to decline, this starts to increase. And then they meet in the middle about year 5 of a relationship. 5 to 7 to somewhere between that is the end of this is the honeymoon period and this is the end of it. And at this point people become like the friendship, the companionate is what really matters, and it defines the relationship, and it is as high as the passion was when it started. This, my friends, is what sustains the relationship over time. This does not. If you notice, this is about the same level as like a friendship. This essentially, if this is what all that you feel for the person you're married to, they become an F buddy. That's what it is. You know, if this companionship does not take over after sort of that 5 year mark, the relationship doesn't continue. It doesn't maintain, because this is ultimately what people want. This is reproduction. We need to reproduce, need to reproduce, need to reproduce. Okay, I'm done reproducing. And it's like, what's the point in being together anymore? If I've already had children with you, what's the point? This, though, this is an active decision. I want to be with this person because they are literally my first, my last, my everything. They are everything that I need in my life. This is so much more important. And for me, anyway, I put a lot of emphasis on this. If I don't feel like a relationship, it's like if I have a sexual attraction for someone, but my companionate feelings for them are not high, I'm like, not worth it. It's not worth it because it's not going to last. You have relationships where they're like the level of like a normal friend, but they're like really like you're just into them sexually, and then your feelings of companionship for them are not that high. They're about where they should be when the relationship started. This will not sustain a relationship for very long because you're like, eh. You're sort of like in this place. Then there are people who like start out and they like have no, like they have hardly any friendship feelings but high sexual attraction. So then like these two levels are at the same level, or maybe they're slightly apart like that. That's not going to sustain a relationship. Now, if you start out very companionate with them and maybe lower sexually, the companionship's just going to continue to increase because friendships get stronger over time. So the companionate love is really what matters when it comes to a relationship. You don't really the passion is only there to help you reproduce. If you're not interested in reproducing, there's really no point in it, in my opinion. Now, the feeling of being in love does decline over time, and this decline is not so much a decline of caring about them is not really feeling passionate about them, because the feeling of being in love is largely driven by passion because it is the beginning of the relationship. Now, in terms of what keeps the companionate love alive, what makes it sustain a relationship, well, intimacy maintenance is key. Expression of commitment, communication are so important. So you can have a relationship. I shouldn't have erased my thing. Where I had that original chart where you have high passion that wanes over time, respectful companionship that increases over time. So this is normal. This is a normal relationship. Now, this increases because of intimacy maintenance. You're expressing commitment, you're communicating, and that boosts you up. Now, if you're not doing that, then you might go up a little bit, but then you're gonna level out. You go boop 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 boop, and then it's gonna start to go down. If you're not, you've got this. This doesn't just happen naturally. You have to. It happens naturally if you are truly committed to them. You express it and you communicate with them. If you don't, it's just gonna go down. If it goes below this relationship's doomed. Um, a tender, caring bond is what's necessary for the long-term relationship success. This right here happens because you have that tender, caring bond. So marriage, what's the deal? Well, marriage is, to a lot of people and in a lot of cultures, especially Western cultures, the ultimate expression of commitment. It is a public declaration that you are committed to this person, that you love them, that you want to have a family with them. However, it doesn't, just because that's what it's seen as doesn't mean that's always what it is. Um, and marriages take a lot of different forms. Um, Most people marry in their mid to late 20s. Um, so I'm at prime marrying age. So I'm in my mid 20s. I'm heading towards my late 20s, and there's not a prospect in sight. I don't even have a prospect of a prospect. That's how bad it is. There are two main types of relationships that there could be. The first is a traditional marriage. Now, if we want to talk about tradition and we want to talk about the history of marriage, a traditional marriage would be the man buys the woman, because literally, this is a little bit off topic, but this is something I feel really passionate about. If you analyze the marriage ceremony as a cultural studies scholar, and I have a degree in English literature, and literally looked at gender representation in literature. And so the marriage ceremony is literature. It's a written ceremony. The father escorts the bride in because the father owns the daughter. Okay? And 18th century, 19th century, 17th century culture and earlier, female children belonged to the father. They had no rights. The father escorts the daughter in and gives her in marriage to the husband. Now, this idea of a dowry, the father's gift to the bride, is actually a gift made to the husband, and it's the husband's portion of the father's estate. This is essentially the payment that the father is making for the daughter. He's saying, I am selling my daughter to you. I'm giving you my daughter, I'm giving you rights to my estate. And so all the marriage ceremony is, if you think about it, if you look at the history of it, you look at the way that it's written, it's a legal agreement between two parties where this piece of property is exchanged. It's pretty sickening if you think about it, right? And this is why upper class people are pressured into these marriages with other upper class people, because it's all about exchanging property. And so if you have sons, the goal is to have as many sons as you can, because the sons will marry women who will give these nice dowries that will then be, the son will then have his portion of his father's estate and then his wife's portion of her father's estate. And this idea of like the fancy wedding and all the dresses, that's just a display of wealth. So if we want to talk traditional marriage, that's a traditional marriage, okay? Now, we have evolved as a society, thank God, where marriage is now more a symbolic demonstration of how much we love another person. Um, Still used as a display of wealth, still somewhat used as a property transfer. I was my sister's wedding planner. I wrote her vows for her. I wrote the whole ceremony because she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to have a church wedding, but she was kind of pressured into it. And I wrote one of the most feminist wedding ceremonies I think I've ever seen in my life, where it was they gave each other away to themselves. There was none of this father giving anyone away. Um, Now, traditional marriages, in the sense of what we're talking about, is a marriage where the husband is the head of the family and the wife is the caregiver and the homemaker. In other words, the husband has somewhat of an ownership position over the wife and kids because he is in charge, and the wife's role is to take care of the children and of the home. Egalitarian marriages are the other side of this, and this is where both people are equal partners. Both are treated with the same dignity and respect, and they have carry the same weight in the household. And growing up, I thought my parents had a traditional marriage, and looking back, I realized they're actually egalitarian, because my mom often will say, if you ask her something, well, ask your dad, and then you ask him, and he says, ask your mom. And so, like, then if you were a sneaky kid, you would go back to mom and say, Dad said whatever you said. Um, But typically, what would happen is my parents would talk about it and they'd make a decision together. That's egalitarian. You can still have an egalitarian marriage where the man has certain roles that are deemed more traditional, and the wife has roles that are deemed more traditional. But if you're still making decisions together, and each person has equal say in the partnership, then it's an egalitarian marriage. And that also, the other part of that is it doesn't necessarily follow that egalitarian marriages have to be one where both spouses are working. You can have an egalitarian marriage where the husband is the breadwinner and the wife stays home and is the caregiver and homemaker, but it's different because she is not considered subservient to her husband. He's not her head. He's not the head of the family. They're both making decisions. The wife's job is to take care of the home. And so that can be an egalitarian marriage. So a lot of people actually have egalitarian marriages and they don't realize it. Now, even in egalitarian marriages, women tend to bear the brunt of the housework and the child care. So even in a situation where both partners are equal and both are contributing equally to the family, even in marriages where the woman is also working, women still tend to do the brunt of the housework and childcare, and that's because that's what women have been conditioned to do and what men have been conditioned to expect of women. Now, men tend to do the yard work and the maintenance and stuff like that and pay the bills. So there is there if you were to add up like the total amount of work, there is probably an equal amount of work being done, but it's not balanced. There's not diversified. Men tend to be happier in their marriage than women. So there are a lot of different reasons for that. I think the biggest is that men tend to be more sexually active than women, so they've had a chance to explore what they like and what they don't like. Whereas women tend to not be as sexually active, they tend to get married younger, and so they kind of end up in a situation where they're probably like there's a lot of passion for this person and there is some companionship, but over time the companionship isn't very high. They don't really they're not really well suited for each other. I think that's probably why we see that. Now, 25% of marriages last 50 years, so not a great number, um, but not necessarily due to divorce. I mean, some people don't live that long, don't live to have a 50-year marriage. Um, Now, in terms of the benefits of this over time, marriage does improve your long term health. So, if you're married, you tend to be healthier in the long term because, one, your emotional needs are being met, you have a companion for a guaranteed companion. And if you're with someone, you live with someone, they're watching out for you and you're watching out for them. So they notice when things change. We don't often notice when our health changes because these changes often are very gradual. And when you live with them every day, you don't really see them. But if you're an outside person, a lot of times you do notice differences like that. And so a lot of times men don't do well when they're widowed because their wives tend to make them go to the doctor, tend to make sure that they're taken care of because men tend to just suck it up and deal with it. So that improves men's long term health for sure. Now, as we get older, our household chores become more equal. So men start to do more work around the house. Women maybe do some more work in the yard. Interesting story. My dad's parents. So my grandmother is an invalid. Can't she has had to have both her knees replaced and both her shoulders replaced because she has severe rheumatoid arthritis. And so over time, my granddad has become her caretaker, and so he does all the cooking and cleaning in the house now, and all of the laundry. And so there's a huge switch in roles. In terms of my parents, my dad is 50, my mom is 47, I think. Um, and they're getting older. They're getting close to late adulthood. My dad would kill me if he knew that because he's having a hard time with 50, but they're become much more egalitarian. My dad does a lot of the cooking now for the family, whereas before he would probably wouldn't have done that. So a lot of the reason for that is as we get older, we get more secure in our identities. We don't really care if we're living traditional roles or not. We just do what we have to do. I think as an aside, think it's silly that we make cooking and cleaning like women, like we identify those with women because everybody has to eat and nobody likes to have dirty underwear. So it's like, I just think it's silly that we condition people that way. Now, divorce. Divorce is awful. Um, Sometimes it's necessary. oftentimes is very necessary. People who get divorced probably need to, um, but it's still awful. It's a terrible experience. My mother's parents divorced after 45 years of marriage, and it was nasty and awful, and it was just a terrible experience for all of us. Um, I have friends whose parents have got divorced when they went to college because they no longer had a reason to be together. They were only together for the kids. Terrible reason to stay together, by the way. If you're married to someone you hate their guts, and you're like, I'm staying with them for the kids, don't. Because that will destroy your children's ability to have healthy relationships as adults. It literally destroys a child's self esteem, their ability to be intimate with other people, their ability to trust other people, because they're being constantly exposed to these toxic relationships. If you cannot stand someone, then don't be in a relationship with them. And just be a mature adult and work it out and have a good co-parenting relationship with the other partner or the other parent of your child. Now, 45% of marriages in the US dissolve, so it's a little bit less than the 50% of marriages that we talk about. This usually occurs within the first 7 years of marriage. So, about the time that passion dies down, there's just not enough companionate love to keep the marriage together. Um, with divorce, we see what's called the feminization of poverty, and this is the reality that women suffer the most economically from a divorce because women tend to not be the breadwinner of their home. And they also, tend to be given custody of children. So suddenly they have less money and they're still having to take care of kids. Now, the causes of divorce tend to be lack of communication and life stressors. So again, intimacy maintenance, expressions of commitment and communication are important to lift this up, right? So if you have lack of communication, it's not going to get your companionship up. And then when you have life stressors, that reduces your feelings of passion and your feelings of tenderness towards a person that you're not really that into very quickly. If your life's stressful, you're like, get out of my way, this person who no longer makes me feel good about myself. Um, Now, late life divorce is pretty uncommon. About 5% of older Americans, older adults get divorced. Um, and in the cases where this does happen, women typically are the ones initiating proceedings. They get tired of this partner that they've been with. They stayed together for the kids. After the kids left, they tried to stick it out. They couldn't do it. They got divorced. Those women tend to not get remarried, unfortunately. Men do tend to be very quick in repartnering. Um, Now, late life remarriage is very successful compared to remarriage at any other point. But at that point, you know who you are, you know what you want, and you're going to find exactly what you want. You tend to not really have much of a sex drive, so it's not so much about sex as it is about being with someone that makes you feel good and makes you feel happy and that you like to be with. And so that all the biology is out of the way at this point. That doesn't mean that older people don't have sex. They do. And you can have a very healthy sex life after 60, but it's not the primary motivation anymore. Parenthood is another aspect of adult relationships. Parenthood can be incredibly rewarding. It's not for everyone. It's perfectly fine to not want kids. Um, it's not abnormal to not want kids, but it's definitely atypical. Most people, because of our instinct, want to have children, but if you don't, you're just atypical. Not a big deal. There's no value judgment assigned to atypicality. Um, what leads people to want to have kids though? What are the processes that we go through? Well, we have to consider our economic standing, whether or not we really want to have kids, and the stability of our partnership. So people who are financially stable, want to have kids, and feel very stable in their relationship with their spouse, those are the people who tend to have children and to do it very well. Some people may have the economic means to have children. They may want to have kids, but their partnership stability isn't very good. That may keep them from wanting to have kids. Well, I'm not sure if this person's going to stay with me, and I don't want to have kids if they're not going to stay with me. Or, on the other side, I don't think this person's going to stay with me unless we have kids. We've got to have kids so that they're forced to stay with me. Yeah, that's going to set you up for not a great situation later in life. Um, so that could be another factor. Now, the transition to parenthood can be very difficult for the first and second child, especially for the first, because you have literally no idea what you're doing. The second child can be stressful, especially and difficult, especially if it deviates from the way the first child was, and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew what I was doing. After that, they just kind of walk out, and you just kind of know what you're doing. Um, in this transition to parenthood, if you're in a strained partnership, if you're having issues with your partner, the relationships get worse. So having a kid to improve your relationship that's not doing very well is a terrible idea because it does not work. Um, Now, if you're in a positive partnership, you're with someone that's very stable, you're happy, you both want to have this child, you're both in love with each other, the companionate love's kicked in, you're good, you're good to go. The increased stress doesn't affect it because you're partners, you're communicating, you're expressing commitment. You may really hate it. You may be sick and tired of not getting any sleep and this baby's crying and you're like, why did we decide to do this? Like we were happy before this. But it's not going to make your not going to affect your relationship. You're just going to like, it's just going to be another thing that you have to do together, that you're going to have to put up with together and soldier through together. And honestly, I mean, I've never had a child with anyone, so I don't know this for a fact, but I have been with people who I really, really care about and who I'm in love with and who I have a positive relationship with, and I've had to face really horrible situations with that person, and honestly, it was stressful, but it didn't affect our relationship because we were there for each other and we communicated and we provided emotional support, and at the end of the day, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Now, the second strain that parenting can put on relationships comes with when adolescence set in. So you have a rocky relationship, you have this kid, it strains your relationship, but you survive it. Okay, and you're kind of getting back together. You know, you're you're with this person. You're like, yeah, the sex is whatever. They're I'm comfortable where I am. I care about them. I like them as a friend, but I don't really like care one way or the other. It's kind of like an really. I mean, we all know people like this, where they're in a like this relationship where the people they're really just roommates. They're good friends. They live together. They live very separate lives. But they're married and they're committed to that marriage because they have kids and they don't hate each other. They're not in love with each other anymore. Um, then adolescence kicks in. Now, a partnership where you're partnered with someone that you don't love and you're just with out of convenience, but you don't hate them, I would call that a troubled partnership. It's not going to last because according to social psychology, the only reason that you're still together is because they fulfill some kind of need for you, and if that need is economic or some other kind of stability, our need for like some kind of like partnership or some kind of friendship, and it's gonna cease to be a factor if you find someone else. So this is a troubled partnership. There's no commitment here. There's no real commitment here. You're committed to whatever it is that whatever function that is they play in their life. So if you're parenting an adolescent, adolescents are a pain in the backside. They are so irritating, and when you're in a good relationship with your partner, it's still really frustrating, and you like literally like vacillate between wanting to murder your offspring, to 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 get rid of your spawn, or just feeling like you're a failure as a parent and they don't love you and you've somehow done something wrong, because that's what it's like parenting an adolescent. They're going through these massive cognitive physical changes. They're not stable, and so they make everyone around them unstable. So if you're in a troubled partnership and you're only together because there's some stability there and they like meet your financial needs, like, and suddenly the home becomes an unpleasant place to be, you're going to start looking somewhere else for that stability. And so it can really destroy a relationship if you go into adolescence with someone that you're not in love with or you have a troubled relationship with. And this can increase stress on the primary caregiver because a lot of times what happens is the secondary caregiver kind of backs out and starts to look for other options, other places, and then they're the ones stuck dealing with this by themselves. As we get closer to the end of life, parenthood transitions into grandparenthood. And we all love our grandparents, I hope. even though I have a strained relationship with my grandparents, I love them all. Um, I don't like some of my grandparents. I'll be honest, I don't like some of my grandparents because they're they're selfish and they've been abusive to their children, emotionally abusive to their children, and I would say that to their face. So I'll say it on this lecture. But we still care about our grandkids, our grandparents, because they are parental figures to us. Um, and in middle adulthood, we start to transition from parent to grandparent. This happens about the 50s. My mom jokes around that she's in grandmother mode now. She's like, "When are you going to have a kid?" I'm like, "Mom, I can't have kids." Um, for many different reasons. So that all eyes are on my sister and her husband. The bond between grandparents, and grandchildren really depends on the distance between them. So people tend to settle near the wife's mother. So maternal grandparents are usually closer to their grandchildren than paternal grandparents. Um, but it could be the other way around. I grew up in the same town as my maternal grandparents. I was very close to them and not as close to my dad's parents. But I still have a very strong bond with my dad's mother. Um, and don't have a very good relationship with my mom's parents. So, you know, a lot of it has to do with distance, but it also has to do with the warmth of the relationship and the trust. My I don't my dad's parents don't agree with me on everything. My dad's mother definitely doesn't agree with everything that I stand for, but she has never abandoned me ever. She has always been there for me, and that distance, psychological distance from her, has been what has made our bond as strong as it is. Um, in low income households, grandparents are usually an essential part of the family. In very low income working class families, grandparents may live in the home with the family. In ethnic minority groups, and black families, and Latinx families, and Native families, grandparents may be an essential part. They may be a third caregiver. They may live in the house, actually live in the house, and have always lived in the house and play a parental role in some way. Maybe not there may be two parents in the home still, but the grandparent is also a parent because they live there. They've helped raise the kids, and that's why one of the biggest reasons why elderly people are such revered members of those cultures because there's such a strong bond. You have the same bond with the grandparent as you do with your own parents. What about gay and lesbian older adults? How do gay and lesbian relationships work for older adults? Well, there's a lot of debate about whether or not you can get good life satisfaction out of a same-sex relationship. And the news, my friends, based on scientific research, is that same-sex couples report high life satisfaction in older adulthood. In other words, there's no difference. If you're in a committed relationship, it doesn't matter what the gender or sex of your partner is. If you're in a good, committed, healthy relationship, you're going to have high life satisfaction. Now, there are some pretty unique things that or challenges that happen for gay and lesbian older adults. The first is the loss of Social Security benefits on a partner's decease. So we talked about when we talked about retirement what Social Security is. Well, your spouse is entitled to your Social Security benefits until they die. But because um, gay and lesbian people could not get married until 2 years ago, I think, in the United States at the federal level, they didn't get Social Security benefits. So think about it. If you're in a same-sex relationship and one partner is the primary breadwinner and one is not, and the primary breadwinner dies, the one that's not is going to be living a much different lifestyle than they were before because they're not getting their partner's Social Security benefits. They may not even be entitled to their retirement. They may not be entitled to anything. Um, if you don't have all the legal paperwork in place, their parents can shut you out of the end of life decisions, can shut you out of the funeral, can shut you out of everything. And this happens. You have partners who literally were destitute when their partner died because the family swept in and got rid of them because they had no legal rights because they weren't legally married. And actually, the reason we have marriage equality in the U.S. is because several same-sex couples who lost a partner and lost everything sued the federal government for it. Um, Same-sex couples tend to have to build chosen families of friends and family members who support them because they may not have biological or family of origin um, to be there and support them. And so a lot of times you'll see same-sex couples. They'll have chosen family. They may adopt like not legally but like socially and emotionally adopt like a younger couple and their kids is like their kids and grandkids. Um, I have this. There are several older couples that I know who I've sort of taken as surrogate grandparents in the absence of having grandparents here, one, but also having accepting grandparents. And this happens to anyone who doesn't have kids, any older person. A lot of times you'll see older people will sort of socially adopt younger people to just kind of be there and to play that role of a grandparent so that they can have that emotional fulfillment. Unpartnered gay and lesbian people experience much higher levels of loneliness, so it can be very hard it's hard enough as an LGBT person to find a partner. I mean, I've been single for 3 years, and I think I'm pretty awesome, so it's hard. Um, but when you're older, when you're older in general, it's harder to find partners. When you're a gay or lesbian person, or a bisexual person, or even a transgender person, and you're older, you may never find anyone. And so you have higher levels of loneliness because when you get older, in lieu of a romantic relationship, you may have your primary emotional like emotional fulfillment, your primary relationship may come from your grandkids or your kids or your nieces or your nephews. If you don't have a family, then it can be a very isolating time in your life. The end of relationships in adulthood, if they don't end in divorce, is widowhood. And widowhood is simply the loss of a partner to death. And women are much more likely to be widowed than men. About 40% of married women are widowed before their husbands. And the reason for this is women tend to live longer. So men tend to die, and women tend to live alone and to be widowed for the last 5 to 10 years of their life. Now, for many women and men, but especially for women, widowhood brings about a loss of identity and intense loneliness. Think about it, when you've lived with someone for 50 years, say you were married 50 years and your partner died in your 51st year of marriage. You've spent half a century living with that person, doing everything with that person, being identified with that person, sharing a life with that person, and suddenly they're gone. What does that do to your identity? If you've been doing something for 50 years and suddenly you don't have it anymore, that can be terrifying. And it can be very lonely. If they're your best friend, they're literally everything to you and they're gone, that can be hard. And then you're like 70 or 80 years old and like everything else is falling apart and you lose the one person that you wanted to do, like to go through that with, that can be really devastating. However, while women tend to have a great loss of identity and intense loneliness, they adjust to widowhood better than men do. Women historically have been used to being on their own because even when you're married, your husband, if he works, may be gone long stretches of the day, may go on business trips. Women are used to being alone. They're used to finding other things to do. And women tend to be more socially active than men. Men are a lot less likely to be involved in clubs and religious life because most of their life they spent working. So women who don't work supplement the time at home with like involvement in charity work and going to church and being involved in small groups at church. So women, even if they lose their husband, they still have a social support system around them, whereas men typically don't. Um, and so men tend to report worse depression and thoughts of suicide after widowhood. And they're also more likely to suffer physical declines. And one of the saddest examples of this, my great aunt Jane, loved her. She was a wonderful person, so kind, literally the kindest person I've ever met. Died after a very long, drawn out battle with cancer. And it was devastating. Her husband, who she'd been married to for I don't know how very long time, decades, did not survive her by 8 months. He couldn't live without her, and he died. It was natural. It was a natural death. He had a heart attack. But the strain, the stress of losing her, the grief just put too much of a strain on his body, and he died. Um, and that's really common. So it's very important when you have a loved one in your life, an older loved one in your life who gets widowed. It's very important to be there for them and to help them adjust to the new life, because it's not a death sentence if you lose a partner. You don't have to lose a partner of 50 years and then die like 8 years after them or 8 months after them. You can live another however much longer you can actually physically live if you find another way to get the emotional support that you need. Um, so yeah, that's kind of sad. What a sad note to end on. Okay, our last class is tomorrow. So sad. Read the last chapter of the book, pages 639 to 665. I want you to think about, what do you fear the most about death? Remember, your essay's due tomorrow. There's nothing due today, so just keep writing. I think it's really poignant that our last class is about the end of life, because it is the end of the life of our class. So just think about what do you fear most about death? And I also want you to think about, because this will be your discussion question for tomorrow. What was the most important lesson you learned in this class? So think about those things as you prepare for class tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow. Let me know if you have any questions. Darcy.corbetthall, CORBITTHALL, @ndsu.edu. I'll talk to you later.